Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Bill Kramer, CEO of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. Welcome to our David Geffen Theater, the Academy Museum of Motion Pictures. I think all of you know, but our museum is the largest institution in the world devoted to global cinema and to the arts, sciences, and artists of movie making. We are thrilled to have you with us today. It's my honor to be here to introduce this year's George Stevens Lecture on Directing. This is part of our long-standing partnership with our good friend, George Stevens Jr., who is with us today. More about him in a moment. The series started in 1982 with George Stevens Jr., Robert Benton, and Faye Kanan. And today, we are thrilled to have director, writer, and producer Guillermo del Toro with us. Also a great friend of the Academy and the Academy Museum. Today, as you heard, we are screening a brand new 2K restoration of The Greatest Story Ever Told. I'd like to thank Amazon, MGM Studios, and the Film Foundation for this beautiful restoration. George for his ongoing and vital support, and Guillermo for being with us today and for everything he does to support film preservation, restoration, and exhibition. Today's event is just one of the hundreds of screenings and programs the Academy Museum offers to the public every year. Over the next month, we will continue our screening series inspired by our spectacular Jaws exhibition. If you haven't seen it, you must. Next week, we launch our week-long celebration of the visionary director David Lynch. Kyle MacLachlan and Laura Dern will be with us. And through the end of February, we will celebrate our Designing to Music gallery upstairs with screenings of musicals including Gypsy, Hedwig and the Angry Inch, and Moulin Rouge. Also, look out for our upcoming program on space travel in the movies, which begins on January 30th with a screening of Star Trek IV. George Takei will be with us in person. So we've got a lot lined up. To learn more about all of this, please visit academymuseum.org. You'll learn about our upcoming Marilyn Monroe exhibition, our upcoming exhibition on George Stevens Jr. George has been an Academy member since 1959, and we are incredibly proud and honored to have his papers and films in our Academy collection. George was the founding director of the American Film Institute and the creator of the Kennedy Center Honors. He's the recipient of 15 Emmys, an honorary Oscar, and the Presidential Medal of Freedom. He is truly a remarkable man and a great friend to all of us and the entire filmmaking community. Please join me in welcoming George Stevens Jr. to the podium.
Thank you to Bill Kramer, who does such an outstanding job of moving this great Academy into the future. And also to Amy Homa, who is here, who is the inspiring leader of this museum, and her colleague, KJ Ralph Miller, who worked with me to make all of this possible. My father spent 5 years working on his film about Jesus, The Greatest Story Ever Told. And finally, the film was complete. He would fly to New York to show the film to the men who financed it for him, the great Robert Benjamin and Arthur Krim, who were the heads of United Artists. He boarded American Airlines over here at Los Angeles Airport, and in those days, the hostess would come down the seat with an armful of magazines. And Mr. Stevens, would you like something to read? And he said, well, thank you. He says, do you have Time magazine? And she handed him the magazine, and he sat back and he looked down at the cover. Perhaps the most famous cover ever of Time magazine. There was no artwork, no photographs, only a black background with red letters. 3 words, is God dead? Well, he had a sense of humor. He from Laurel and Hardy. So he took that as a little grain of salt and released the picture. Now, today we celebrate the restoration of the greatest story ever told after decades of neglect. But Amazon MGM Studios initiated a restoration last year. It is a 4K restoration made from 8K scans of the 65 millimeter negative. We were fortunate that MGM Amazon enlisted the foremost colorist of films, a person recommended to me by Christopher Nolan 2 years ago when he gave the George Stevens lecture. And the colorist is the one who goes frame by frame through the picture, making certain that the image reflects the director's original vision. And I'd just like to say on behalf of my father and the kind of army of colleagues who worked on this film 60 years ago, we would like to thank on their Costas Theodosiou. Costas, would you stand so people can see you? Academy is a leader in the field, and so appropriate today that we have the premiere of this film. Now, I've been asked to make a note that there is an intermission, and it's a short intermission, so don't go to Fanny's and order a cheeseburger. We're going to try and keep this moving. As to the movie, The Greatest Story, I will simply say my father understood something about the human condition. And may it be that the themes in his film, compassion, love, and mercy, will be welcomed by audiences in today's troubled times. And we have with us one of the world's most accomplished filmmakers. He is well known to this audience, as is apparent, so I will not recite his credits or list his Oscars. I prefer to say that to my eye, the measure of Guillermo del Toro as a man and as a filmmaker is the breadth of his humanity. His compassion and creativity have shown respect for audiences for nearly 3 decades. Your films, Guillermo, touched me so deeply, and yes, especially recently, when you brought your Frankenstein to life before my eyes. You have another essential quality. I know of no one who speaks with greater insight about cinema, who is so articulate in offering perspective on films and film history. We are blessed that you have chosen to live in America and to elevate our appreciation of this form of art, which has been such an important part of this town. My profound thanks for making time to consider the work of my father and to deliver the George Stevens lecture. Guillermo del Toro.
Thank you very much. I'm Mexican, and I was raised very Catholic. So in my youth, I saw this movie at least 20 times. I watched it 3 more times this month, and I'm going to watch it with you today. And, for those that don't know that much about George Stevens, I will not recite many of the facts that are very well known, but like a few filmmakers, he lived through every era of cinema. He started in the silent era. He was about 17, 18 when he joined the Hal Roach Studios as a cranker, meaning he determined the speed of the camera, how many frames per second, by his ability to turn a crank. He worked with actors really fast. He started working with Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy really early on, and he became very good friends with Stan Laurel. He, in fact, solved the problem of the eyes of Stan Laurel being too light, too blue to register on film. And he said, well, we can do it with panchromatic film. He changed the stock, and his eyes became visible. They became very, very good friends, and I happen to be the most ardent fan of Stan Laurel. I think he's one of the greatest comedians in history. I dedicated the performance of Sally Hawkins on Shape of Water to Stan Laurel. That's the reference we have. And in 1931, I found a scrap of paper in a scrapbook for Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy, where in 1931, George Stevens says Stan Laurel gave him a book called Clowns and Pantomimes, that he said everything you need to know about comedy and drama is in this book. And Stevens lamented having lost it in that little scrap of paper. So what I did is I dedicated myself to finding it, and I found it. So this is the very book that he gave to George Stevens as he departed Hal Roach Studios. And he said, use it, and use it to tell a story for America, for people that need it. And there's a quote in the book that says, all the play be neither right tragedies or right comedies, for they mingle kings and clowns, and all opposites are only to be understood through each other. This quote and the way the book breaks down the relationship between hatred, fear, and love are many of the lessons. This is a book, track it, I recommend it. It takes about 3-4 weeks to find it, but you do find it. But more importantly, the book highlights the way that drama can change society. I think that Stevens understood this. If you see the comedies he was doing for Hal Roach, they were the antidote to the era of depression, one of the hardest eras in American history. And we're talking about a man that was very, very laconic. George Stevens was inwards, laconic. He didn't emote too much, but he was incredibly expressive through his work, through his cinema. You can find out sometimes more about an artist by their art than by sharing space and time with them. This is a time and a generation that didn't signal virtue, but practice it. Yeah. They didn't tell you who they were, they demonstrated you who they were. So, and Stevens, you can track his evolution, as Marty Scorsese said in the introduction, through his movies. In the documentary that I participated in, or in the book, Five Came Back, we narrate the journey and the tragic interaction with the results of World War II that 5 filmmakers from Hollywood had in Europe. George was one of them. When he had to confront the horrors of concentration camps at the end of World War II, he just came back a changed man. He had left comedy behind. The 2 genres that he had mastered before were comedy and musical, to a degree of high precision, and now he had to start over. He had, by then, a moment of examination. People call his films an American trilogy. I think it starts earlier, when he comes back and he says, I remember Mama. He's already he's going to track the American soul from its sort of humble beginnings with simplicity all the way to this movie that we're going to see today in so many ways. He went to World War II because he realized that triumph of the will was a tool for social change for the bad. It was basically a recruitment of prejudice, a recruitment for hatred, and a moment in which he realized that art and narrative had such a high call into telling us what we are and who we are, which we are living right now, today. And the decency and the compassion are our superpowers. Don't let them lie to you that hatred is a superpower. It diminishes us. And Stevens understood this. And he then dedicated time from I Remember Mama to A Place in the Sun, a film that few have seen called Something to Live For, but I adore, Shane, and Giant. Now, this man influenced, and I want to make the case today, the new American cinema. He influenced Martin Ritt, Warren Beatty, Terrence Malick, and many more. But we'll talk about it in a second. The Diary of Anne Frank, which he shoots in 1959, is part of this process. When people call a trilogy, you don't plan a trilogy. It happens. We step into the future backwards. As artists and as people, we're looking the other way and going into what we're going to become without having a plan. You have an artist thinking and questioning his very essence and the essence of America and the essence of being a decent man through his work. That is his eloquence. And the Diary of Anne Frank takes it to the very moment where he started to question that. A process that he had seen and lived. That's when he finds out that the greatest story ever told is being made, precisely in the middle of that shoot. And he decides to tackle it. And that's when his quest becomes spiritual, and he becomes involved in it. He said, and I quote him, "The real fascination of the Christ story is that a man lived and a man died. A man died and lived again. The people are seeking a king. They're trying to escape their responsibility. They must have a king. They must have a God. They must have someone that represents for them the law. So they set up the machinery to make that work and bring that man to a trial. The machinery of the trial is set up to maintain the order in that group, imposing order upon itself. So one of the quests he was trying to grapple with is not one group crucified Jesus. We all crucified Jesus. He said, there's no them. It was us. He wanted man to be the reason for the crucifixion. He wanted to make it about his soul, the soul he understood. And I happen to think that whether he thought about it or not, bringing that story to America had a reason. There's a school of painting founded by Thomas Cole, amongst others, the Hudson River School of Painting, which saw God in the landscape of America. And it started as a school of painting that tried to represent America in realism, in its grandeur, because God is in the landscapes of this film. If you want to find him, you'll find him in the landscapes, and we'll talk about it in a second. Now, the Hudson River School, eventually influenced by the Romantics, became a spiritual school of painting and a purely American school of painting. So I think that him bringing those landscapes here, he wanted to show the possibilities of examining our responsibility in breeding evil. It was not enough to know when it happened. It was necessary to know how we end up destroying that which is good if you're not careful. And for that, his canvas became not Super Panavision 70, but Ultra Panavision 70, shot with the spherical system that gave him extra space. Now, there are two things that are in battle at that moment, and I'm going to take a moment to situate you in where and what climate he shot this movie. There was a battle between TV and cinema. We're there again, right? So the battle was, how do we get people to theaters? And one of the things was spectacle. The larger formats were getting people into theaters, but very few directors really knew how to use it, and how to use it expressively. Stevens did, and he demonstrated it over and over again. He was a great cinematographer. Just for those that are not active in the profession or in layman terms, in order to shoot certain scenes, you have the most merciless collaborator in the sun. The sun moves across the sky no matter who you are. You can be Kubrick or not, or Ed Wood. The sun is going to go the same route. And you have about 10 to 20 minutes to shoot something backlit, something sidelit. And he shot everything in these landscapes, and there are remarkable images done that way. Now, he needed the grandeur to make the characters in the movie blind to it. The terrible, petty drama of humanity happens in God's landscape. Man is, in essence, a blind clown, and the crucifixion is his pratfall. He commissioned for the creation of this movie 352 paintings. Not storyboards, full paintings. 352 paintings done by a Frenchman, André Girard, who had been a member of the resistance, French resistance during World War II. And a man that ended up coming to America and creating stained glass and murals for churches in Vermont, New York, and California. They were not meek Christians that believe in only pacifism. They knew resistance was necessary to uphold virtue. He studied 36 versions of the New Testament and consulted with John XXIII, the Pope, for his film. Now, the second thing, and this is the reason the movie, one of the reasons the movie has been, in my opinion, misunderstood, is the other tendency to fight TV was to cast the movies with constant stars. In 1963, a comedy film called A Mad, Mad World put that to good effect. And in 65, Stevens takes who he believes are the best actors, and he applies his test, which he shared with George. He said, a movie's importance or not, 25 years after it's made. Not now, because in 25 years, maybe people will not know who Claude Rains is. Maybe people will not know who Charles Heston is. And this is true. And throughout his history, he was an experimental filmmaker, incredibly modern. In talking with Steven Spielberg, I once said, who would be a filmmaker you would have liked to meet? And the one we immediately coincided, both of us, was George Stevens. And I said, what would you ask? Because he famously would shoot all that footage. He shot 6 million feet of film for this film, right? So he shot from every angle. And he wanted to capture every nuance from every actor, no matter how big or small you were on screen. And then he spent an inordinate amount of time in the confection of the scene in the editing room. And Steven said his method of working and his solutions to the staging were always modern and always almost experimental, even in the middle of academic method. And I agree with him. And this is where the second evaluation of Stevens, I think, is wrong, and where I think he becomes a true auteur and has to be considered as such. This movie comes out in 1965. Now, in between the mid-50s and the end of the 60s, this is what happens. 1954, you have Truffaut published A Certain Tendency of French Cinema, which talks about auteurism. This happens between Shane and Giant for George Stevens. In 1960, Godard films Breathless. In 1962, Andrew Saris publishes Notes on the Auteur Theory. In 1967, Bonnie and Clyde happens in America. 1968, the book American Cinema is published by Saris. And in 1969, The Big Bang is Easy Rider. Now, this, at this time, makes Stevens be considered as a man who makes academic movies. Nothing could be further from the truth. And we can talk about the way he worked with actors and what actors he worked with, the people he inspired. Because he worked with Sal Mineo. He worked with Dennis Hopper. He worked with Jack Palance, which for us, Jack Palance is a classic actor. He was not. He was vibrant and new and ferocious, and even considered Brando for the part of Judas in this film. You know, and if you see Giant, you see the seats or his movies, Place in the Sun, the landscapes with a single house, like the Edward Hopper painting in Giant. He inspired Malick. When James Dean is measuring the land, that's for me Badlands. He inspired Martin Ritt, and he inspired, very importantly, Warren Beatty. I think Warren Beatty is the first man, in my estimation, that notices in the mid-60s that Shane is a modern film. It's a modern masterpiece. He famously uses the same mixing levels for the shots in Shane in the shootout at the end of Bonnie and Clyde. He insists that the percussion, that the brutality of a shot is not a cinematic little bang, that it overpowers with the violence. He understands that this is a very bold technique, this is a very bold decision, and I think we owe it to him, the fact that we can look at Stevens as a modern filmmaker even now. If you think about it also, Shane considers the role of good man and violence, and the role of enforcing the good through violence is not a simple answer. He considers very complicated answers to our basic questions. For me, you can see Hawks, Capra, Ford, and Stevens as being part of a generation, and they are great for different reasons. All of them have sort of a practical two-fisted humanism, but Stevens is the one that is clouded by a deep personal pain and sadness over the human condition. He invented techniques where he used dissolves and a dissolve system in the editing room, so he could see dissolves from one machine to the other right there in the editing room. And that is put to the best use, I believe, in this film. In the opening minutes, you'll see images that become something else. And he said, between two images, there's always a third during a dissolve that furthers the narrative. I think that he kindled the flame of hope, but was never a victim of the blindness of optimism. He was figuring the spirit of man, and in image building, there's few directors that rival him. You know, this film that we're going to see may be his most ambitious. After this film, when he attempts, like Wyler, like Hitchcock, to try to become a modern filmmaker, you know, Wyler with The Collector, Hitchcock with Frenzy, and Stevens with The Only Game in Town, he is rescued beautifully by Warren Beatty, who is already a big star and agrees to work with him because he admires him so much. What would Stevens have done after this film and after giving another chance at the canvas that he was grappling with? We will never know. But I believe that a great man leaves his work behind, and a really good man leaves a good family behind. And I gotta thank George Stevens Sr. for having George Stevens Jr. So I think if you grow up Mexican, every Easter you saw this movie. It's Saturday. Let's have Easter together, shall we? Thank you for coming.